Hello, and welcome back from your spring break. Hope you guys had a good and restful time. And now we are going to endeavor to continue in our academic work as faithfully as we possibly can in light of some of these strange events that are unfolding on the global and national and communal level all around. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some online procedures, the way that school is going to be working for the next couple weeks. We're going to talk about what we're going to be doing specifically in this class on Thursday, Friday, and then next week, Monday through Friday. We're going to be looking a little bit at your Unit 5 review guide, and then we're finally going to be starting OTN 8, which is going to be an analysis of Ellison Durant Smith's speech, Shut the Door. We'll be finishing that OTN tomorrow in class on Friday, okay? But before we do any of that, let's look at a couple of the changes, important changes that have happened in the AP world in light of coronavirus. Now, I know the font here is pretty small. You might have to squint or put your face right next to your computer screen or phone to see this. But this is an email that's already been sent to you, okay? So basically what you need to know is that the College Board has decided for all AP courses that they're going to pivot to a 45-minute online exam that you take from home. This is hugely different than the mammoth multiple hour-long exam that typically you would take for AP Language or AP Lit, all right? And that can be good, but it also can be a little bit of a unique kind of challenge. Basically, what it means is that there are probably going to be no writing sections in the AP Lang or AP Lit exams. What basically that means is that your entire score for the course is going to be collected according to your ability to answer multiple choice questions that require you to read, analyze, and also edit or understand some editing maneuvers that would help clarify the meaning of various kinds of passages. All right. So in other words, basically, what that means is that your work on AP Classroom is all the more important. Okay, you need to be focusing in very intently on doing your absolute best on your AP Classroom work during the course of the fourth quarter because that's basically what the exam is going to look like, okay? So in light of these changes from the College Board, we're going to make a couple changes as well, all right? So first of all, we're going to continue on our curriculum as regularly as possible, and the major assignments that are planned in the curriculum still need to be completed for you to receive AP credit. So we're still going to have to write a major essay. We're still going to have to take some tests that evaluate your ability, the skills that are associated with the AP course. But we are going to be doing so in a way that is efficient, in a way that has been streamlined according to the unique situations that we're facing. To put that in plain speak, it just means that you're going to be doing a little bit less. All right, you're still going to be doing the major work, but a little bit less. All right, because there are no writing portions of the exam, basically, I'm going to be evaluating your writing skills analytically, argumentatively, and synthetically at the end of the year. All right, so the College Board's not going to do it, so I'm going to do it. It's a reasonable thing to do in light of the fact that we spent a year preparing and honing these skills, so I will be evaluating that. That's what I'm supposed to do. All right, and then finally, make sure, once again, that you're emphasizing your work on the College Board AP Classroom website. All right, the whole exam is going to be structured very similarly to the questions that are asked on the AP Classroom questions. Okay, so they'll be structured a little bit differently, but basically they will be multiple choice questions that require you to read a document and analyze, understand, and maybe even make some editing choices about that document. So if you have any questions about this, let me know. Let's make sure that if this is what the College Board's going to do, let's make sure we're ready to nail it, okay? So on a weekly basis, we're going to be emphasizing and taking time out of our week to to really drill down on some of these multiple choice questions. All right, so that's one pivot that we're going to be making. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about how the online portions of this class are going to go. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take attendance every day by looking at the comment section of the video lectures that are posted online. Obviously, they're going to be posted on YouTube on my very famous and critically acclaimed YouTube channel. All right, so when you get to the YouTube channel, make sure you watch the video that has been assigned for that day by 3 p.m. Leave a comment. You can leave a rave review or just say, hi, I was here. Please don't let's avoid like slandering me openly on the internet. Wow, this was so terrible. Although, if you must, I suppose you can, and I'll still mark you present. All right, so make sure that you have some kind of comment in the comment section by 3 p.m. on a daily basis. What about reading checks? Okay, you're still going to have assigned reading, so you definitely, absolutely need your Conversations in American Literature textbook. If you do not have one of those, or if you left it at school, then you need to pick that up. Okay, you're going to need that throughout the course of the quarter. Okay, we're still doing school, so you're going to need your textbook for sure. All right. If you have a reading check, you need to send me an email by 3 p.m. of the reading's due date that articulates the percentage of the reading that you've completed. All right. What about OTNs? As usual, you should complete the assigned OTNs as we complete them in class. Okay. I'm going to announce when they're due in the video lectures and on RenWeb. So make sure you tune into the video lectures. Make sure you're logging on to RenWeb so that you can know when you need to send me confirmation that you've completed an OTN. If I don't get confirmation, then you get a 0 out of 5 for that homework grade. If I get confirmation late, you get a standard late grade. And if I don't get any confirmation in the long term, you just simply get a 0. All right? So the procedure for turning your work is the same unless I ask for a copy of your work. All right? If I ask for an actual copy of your work, you need to email me an attachment of it. Okay? So if I do that, just make sure that you have prepared your work in such a way that you can email me an attachment. It could be a picture of handwritten work. It could be typed work. It could be a Google Doc, but it just needs to be something that gets to me in some way. All right, in terms of major assignments like tests and essays, we are still going to be doing those as normal, but like I said, they're going to be streamlined, okay? So let's quickly talk about what we're going to be doing during this extended week. All right, so before we left, basically what we got done is we looked closely at Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, and we looked at Jane Addams' line of reasoning in The Subtle Problem of Charity. This raised a number of civic questions about the extent to which it is an American's responsibility, moral responsibility, in order to address things like income inequality, the extent to which the government or the extent to which we are morally compelled to intervene in those kinds of social forms of inequality. All right. Basically, that's an interesting conversation, and we get there through looking carefully at Andrew Carnegie and Jane Addams' lines of reasoning. Okay, you should have completed the Unit 3 progress check. Last I checked, some of you still hadn't done that. You are getting 0s out of 5 if you are not doing your progress checks. You need to make sure that you are doing them and doing them well. All right. For this extended week, we are going to be looking at 2 final OTNs before the end of the unit. We're going to be looking at OTN 8 and OTN 9. OTN 8 is about Ellison Durant Smith's argument, Shut the Door. OTN 9 analyzes Robert H. Clancy's response called An Un-American Bill. All right, you need to complete the Unit 4 progress check by Tuesday, March 31st, and you need to begin preparing for and readying yourself for the Unit 5 test. Okay, so the Unit 5 test is going to evaluate your ability to construct a reasonable argumentative essay and also your ability to analyze and describe the ways in which various authors are deploying lines of reasoning and supporting their lines of reasoning with evidence. Okay, so reread Shut the Door and the Un-American Bill by Monday. All right, today's Thursday. Reread it by Monday. Email me your reading check. I need a, hi, Mr. Dale. I read 100% of both of those documents by Monday. Okay, so this is going to be copied and pasted into RenWeb. All right, this will be in the homework section of RenWeb. This needs to happen by Monday. You also need to finish your OTNs as we complete them in class. Today we're going to start OTN 8 and we're going to finish it on Friday. Okay, and then finally, make sure that you're completing the Unit 4 progress check by Tuesday, March 31st. All right. Your ongoing assignments, aside from your quarter 4 essay, which we're going to get into later. I don't really want to explain that assignment quite yet, but we're going to get into that later. You need to begin preparing for the Unit 5 test. You can access the Unit 5 review guide on RenWeb. Let's take a quick look at the review guide for the AP class specifically. All right. All right, I don't want to spend too much time doing this, and I'd like to keep these videos short to about 25 to 30 minutes. You're probably going to have to spot me 30 minutes on this first one since we had to go through 11 minutes of announcements. Normally, these class periods are designed to take around 25 to 30 minutes, okay? So let's look quickly at the test components. There are going to be two components of the test that you're going to take at the end of next week. One are some analytical short answers. Instead of an analytical essay, you're going to be writing short answers. I've streamlined this just a little bit just because the times are sort of strange. You're going to be writing short responses, all right, that are going to require you to apply your knowledge of the content discussed in Unit 4 and 5 to the text we have studied during this unit. Don't know why there's an apostrophe there. For example, I might ask you to analyze Carnegie's use of secondhand evidence to support his claim that the benefits of the laws of competition outweigh the cost in paragraph 2 through 5 of the Gospel of Wealth. There, you would simply need to understand what secondhand evidence is. You would need to understand what a claim is. You would need to have some basic understanding of Carnegie's entire argument so that you could explain how Carnegie uses historical secondhand evidence to support the claim that the laws of competition, or in other words, a competitive economy, are more beneficial than they are harmful. Okay? Other examples of questions of the analytical short answer questions just might ask you to understand or apply some kind of knowledge of inductive logic, deductive logic. It might require you to apply the Toulmin model to a line of reasoning. It might require you to understand the different kinds of claims developed in various arguments. It might require you to construct an open or closed thesis statement that summarizes one person's argument, like whether it be Carnegie or Adams's argument. I might make you write a closed thesis statement for their argument and then evaluate the accuracy of your statement. Obviously, you need to know various examples of first-hand evidence, second-hand evidence. You still need to know your logical fallacies that we discussed, and you need to know the portions of the classical oration model. Okay, so this is all the content from Unit 4 and Unit 5, all of which is centered around lines of reasoning and evidence use. Okay, so some of the composition skills, the second major thing that you need to do is you're going to write an argumentative essay. This is going to require you to not analyze someone's argument, but to produce a cogent, evidence-based argument of your own. All right. So for you AP students, you guys will be writing in response to a past AP prompt. So very similar to the day that we did the class grade about artifice, if you remember the claim of fact about whether or not artifice is the most essential skill in modern culture. You're going to be writing an essay in response to a prompt very similar to that. You're not going to know what prompt it is. All right, we're going to look at some sample essays. We're going to look at some sample prompts to help prepare you. But ultimately, on the day of the test, I'm going to email you the prompt, right? You're going to open the email and you're going to write the argumentative essay and the analytical short responses. Then you're going to email me back your test, all right? So in terms of composition skills, obviously, you can work through these or look through these independently. We'll come back to these later in the week and talk about each one of them individually in our class period devoted to review. But for now, we need to move on to the second or really third portion of the class. All right. So text to study. Last word on this: the text to study. The analytical short answer questions will come from one of these four texts: Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, Adams's Subtle Problem of Charity, Smith's Shut the Door, or Clancy's The Un-American Bill. Okay. First two are about wealth inequality and charity. Okay, the second two texts are about immigration. All right, so we are cutting out the text about the early feminist movement, not because you ladies and your rights are not important, but because we are attempting to streamline the unit, so we need to go ahead and move forward. So I'm cutting those out. All right, 15 minutes has passed. If you need a quick break, you absolutely may take one and rejoin me in just a moment. But for those of you that are still with me, obviously you would want to pause and come back. Now, everybody should be with me. We're going to go ahead and get into our OTN on Ellison Durant Smith's speech entitled Shut the Door. Okay, so we've got three major points that we're going to be exploring. You need to write your OTN, as always, in prose, okay, which is to say in essay form or in paragraph form. The first writing prompt that you have in front of you is, using all the resources at your disposal, establish the rhetorical situation of the document. Okay, this is our goal for today. All right, the second thing that you need to do is summarize the content of Smith's argument by describing the role of each portion of the essay. This is what we're going to do tomorrow. All right, and then finally, we're going to analyze the line of reasoning deployed in Smith's argument and spend a little bit of time unpacking the assumptions on which his reasoning is based. In other words, this is also something that we're going to do tomorrow. Okay, so let's go ahead and establish the rhetorical situation of the text together collectively. All right. In order to accomplish this effectively, obviously you're going to need your Conversations in American Literature textbook. All right, you're going to want to open to page 1007, which is where the document Shut the Door is been included. All right, the document goes on to page 1010. All right, so let's quickly talk about the rhetorical situation of Ellison Durant Smith's argument, Shut the Door. All right, so nothing can stop me, not even Corona, from drawing my favorite diagram. Okay, so go ahead and draw one with me if you want to, or you can just write this in prose straightforwardly. But let me talk through the rhetorical situation, the context of this document, so that we can understand a little bit more about what's at stake and understand a little bit more about the situation to which Ellison Durant Smith is speaking. All right, so Ellison Durant Smith is our speaker. He was born in 1864 and he died in 1944. He was a member of the Democratic Party from South Carolina. So for those of you who know your history, you would know that the Democrat Party for a very large period of American history was deeply associated with segregationist politics, deeply associated with the preservation of white supremacy in the South. Okay, so think of guys like John C. Calhoun, famous Democratic politician from the Southeast, famous leader of basically Southern sectionalist politics that sought to preserve the way of life that was associated with, all right, plantation farming, an agrarian economy that was deeply related to white supremacy and also the enslavement of African Americans. Okay, so Ellison Durant Smith is just a member and an inheritor of that tradition and a perpetuator of that tradition. He was an outspoken white supremacist during his tenure as a U.S. Senator from South Carolina. Okay, he naturally was opposed to allowing immigrants into the nation from non-Western countries. Okay, so when we say non-Western, I don't mean like that. If you go west, that's where all the good countries are. What he means by that is obviously sort of the capital W, Western world. You can think of that as Western Europe. You can think of that as Anglo-Saxon culture. That was sort of the foundation of the American identity, especially in the colonial period, whenever the United States was before the United States was actually a nation, and the Americas were sort of colonized primarily by Anglo-Saxons. Okay, that's what we refer to as the Western world, as sort of European or white culture in general. Okay, obviously, the Johnson-Reed Act is what this document is about. The Johnson-Reed Act was a piece of legislation that sought to establish quotas for immigrants from non-Western nations, specifically East Asian nations. Okay, naturally, Ellison Durant Smith vehemently supported the Johnson-Reed Act. Okay. All right, let's talk about his audience just for a moment, okay? This is kind of shocking, but Smith is speaking on the U.S. Senate floor. It's sort of shocking, just how times have changed. The fact that Smith is saying this not only publicly, but in literally the Senate, the U.S. Senate, and he's saying such deeply racist things is kind of an amazing thing. Essentially, what a senator is a member of a deliberative legislative body. All right. So what happens in the Senate on sort of a fundamental level or an abstract level is that senators deliberate on how to pass laws that reflect the American value system, the values of their constituents. All right. So as times change, right, as circumstances change, the senator's job is to apply and represent his constituents' American values in the American law code, which he is responsible or she is responsible to deliberate on how it should read, essentially. Okay, so that's what a senator does, and that's what's happening in the U.S. Senate with respect to immigration in this rhetorical situation. Okay, so what is the subject? All right, the subject of the speech is whether or not the United States should shut the door to Asian immigrants by passing the Johnson-Reed Act. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the context of the conversation around immigration in America before we shut this down for the day. All right. So from around 1850 to 1930, from the middle of the 19th century, 1850, to the middle of the 20th century, around 1930, all right, 30 million Europeans immigrated to the United States. Which is significantly more than the first basic century, all right, from around 1790 to the middle of the 19th century, which 30 million immigrants is way more than the United States had ever dealt with up to that point. In the first few years of the 20th century, all right, so the early 1900s, a million immigrants per year were pumping in to the United States. As the United States economy grew increasingly modern, as the United States grew increasingly economically powerful and wealthy, people from all over the world wanted to come to America in order to have an opportunity to live the American dream, to make a better life for their families. From all over the world stream in immigrants searching for opportunity in the newly industrialized United States economy. All right. American attitudes toward immigrants were always complex and always rather duplicitous, especially for a nation that was based on the fundamental rights of all men. Okay, like for instance, in 1790, the U.S. naturalization law sort of illustrated this tension because while the border was open, while anyone could come to the United States, essentially anyone could come to the United States, and the borders were basically open. Okay, there's no border patrol or ICE in 1790, right? There's no such thing as an illegal immigrant in 1790. Okay, there's no such thing as a green card or a worker's visa in 1790. Basically, anyone could show up. But if you were white, okay, if you were Anglo-Saxon, all right, if your last name was something like Dale, okay, and not like, say, Bello, all right, if your last name was something like Winfrey, and not like, let's see, Postotnik, then you could get naturalized, all right, which made you able to obtain voting rights and also to hold political office. Okay, so this was an early way of sort of controlling who had a voice in American society, the naturalization law of 1790. Okay, so despite the fact the borders were open, there was still a pretty tight control on who got a voice in American socio-political discourse. All right. Later in the country's history, the Page Act was passed in 1875, and eventually that turned into the legislation associated with the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which began to establish racial boundaries for immigration and to close a once open border. Now, these, if you know your American history, these two pieces of legislation were passed in the late 1800s to protect American workers from competition from Chinese laborers, Chinese immigrant laborers, who would accept wages that were far lower than many American workers during the period, because they were coming from even more aggressive forms of poverty. So while these things oftentimes, these kinds of legislation were oftentimes depicted as something that was protecting Americans, it was establishing racial boundaries for who got to immigrate into the United States. Okay, once again, like the U.S. naturalization law of 1790, okay, reiterating the fact that the American identity, while it ostensibly is for quote unquote all men, right, those who had access to the American dream, those who were protected by the American law code, those who had access to political authority, voting rights, and the full rights of American citizenship and representation in the American government were primarily Anglo-Saxon. All right. Now, this brings us to the actual date of the text. In 1921, the Emergency Quota Act stemmed the tide not only of Asian immigrants, but of all ethnic minorities in the United States. Okay, so basically what it said is that you couldn't, there was only a certain percentage of ethnic minorities allowed to enter the country according to the percentage of minorities that were already here. In other words, okay, sorry that if that's convoluted language to you, but basically what the Emergency Quota Act was attempting to do is make sure that minority groups stayed minority groups and did not grow. They did not increase their presence in America, okay, maintaining a kind of racial homogeneity in the majority of the population. And by 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act essentially banned all immigration from Asia and set caps on immigrants from Eastern European nations. Okay, so Eastern Europe and Asia. What do those two areas of the world have in common? They are not Western. They are non-white. They are far removed from Anglo-Saxon Western European culture. Okay, so These pieces of U.S. legislation have either been significantly modified or completely abandoned in the present day, but they still illustrate a relevant question. All right. So, and that question is something that is deeply relevant even in our current political discourse. For example, what is the purpose of a regulated border? All right. What is a border for? Well, I think the most obvious answer to that is to protect American citizens from outside threats. But, okay, if you're Ellison Durant Smith, a Chinese person is an outside threat. A Vietnamese immigrant is an outside threat. A Mexican immigrant is an outside threat, right? Is that true? What constitutes a threat? How do we regulate our borders if they are meant to protect us from quote unquote threats? How do we collectively as Americans identify that which is genuinely a threat to our well-being? Okay, very obviously we shouldn't let terrorists in, right? Okay, that much is clear. But when it comes to broader forms of legislation, what constitutes a threat? This document gets at that fundamental question. Now, does having a closed border align with basic American values? Some people would argue that the first century of American history, in which we had basically open borders, was more closely aligned with basic American values. Okay, America is supposed to be a place where the rights of all men are and all women are treated as equal, who have inalienable access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Stopping people at the border seems to, at least for some of these individuals, defy those basic values. If we can indeed have a regulated border, then how do we monitor who comes in? Racially? Economically? Religiously? In Canada, right, they invite immigrants to Canada according to their merit, all right? In other words, you can jump to the front of the line to be a Canadian immigrant if you have a certain level of education, a certain level of financial stability, certain merits. Is that a reasonable way to approach regulating one's border? Should there be no standard at all? Should it just be first come, first serve? Should there be specific provisions for people who are in danger, like a refugee or an asylum seeker? All of these questions are dealt with or approached by this document in some way as Ellison Durant Smith develops his purpose. So, what is Smith's central claim? His central claim is a claim of policy. It's about what the American people should do in the early 1920s. He argues that America should shut its doors to non-white immigrants. And his speech, though somewhat erratic, all right, I do not give him an A+ for organization or clarity, supports this claim with the basic reasoning that lies at the foundation of white supremacist, nativistic politics from this period of time. All right. Tomorrow we're going to be unpacking the line of reasoning that is deployed in Smith's argument. Have a great day.